And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, Issuesode 22. I'm Bobsy. We are going issue by issue, page by page, panel by panel, theory by theory through Grant Morrison's cosmic conspiracy classic from a town called 90s, The Invisibles. And this is the one we're on, issue 22. Robust issue, solid stuff, very few marks. You could almost call it mint condition, not for the fact that I just punched it, and for the fact that we've got this wonderful not removable sticker, £1.50 in alarming red ink. Properly, like, still after 30 odd years, still very much stuck to the cover. The kind of thing which you wouldn't get away with nowadays, covering up the names of our authors and artists, indeed. So this one came out this cover dated July 96. That means that it probably was available from about June 96, which means it came out almost. This is probably my birthday issue. This is probably my 18th birthday issue. So I became an adult when this was released, although I don't think. See, this sticker here, it's a mystery. Would a comic shop have had it? Would a news agents have done that? Can't really place where this sticker comes from. So I don't know where or when I was when I bought the issue. But yeah, it would have come out about my 18th birthday. Quick, long 2020 update. Still under house arrest. 2 weeks ago was like a 30-year cold snap. Didn't get any snow here because we never do, but it was freezing. And then in the last week, there's been kind of rumblings about the house arrest thing coming to an end, and that's great. And then within the final 72 hours, basically the weather went from being freezing cold a couple of weeks ago, wet last week, to sunny and beautiful for the past 3 days, and it's just been a big help. It totally changed everybody's mood. The town has woken up. I've been, I won't say what I've been doing because possibly it's not legal, but this issue is called The House of Fun. It's a madness reference. We don't really care about that. Or maybe we do. Maybe we'll get to it when we get to it. On the inside front cover, we've got an advert for Dean Motter's Terminal City. Illustrated by Michael Lark. I mean, I've not read this. It looks boring, to be honest. He does the on the ledge thing at the end of the issue. He writes his little editorial about the concept behind my new Vertigo series, and the concept is it's quite boring. It's basically like the future as envisioned by the World's Fair. It's like a retrofuturism piece. It's weird, actually. Is retrofuturism and hauntology the same thing? I don't think they are, but it's a lost. These are promised futures lost, right? So it'd be really interesting for that reason. You can maybe see that some of the art by Michael Lark here does look brilliant, and the design, if it kind of follows through, and the conceptual kind of underpinning of the story kind of extends to the art. Maybe it's great. I don't know how it connects to the issue in hand. I would say there's a big head, which kind of, like an architectural presence. Maybe that has some relevance. Terminal City. So we are, I think that might be it. We are, this issue is like the first one of the final 3-issue arc, which sort of brings the first book of The Invisibles to a close. Then there's like an epilogue issue, so we're still 4 issues away from the end, but this is like the first issue of it beginning to close. Hence the this cover by Sean Phillips doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but it's like a part 1 of like a triptych, so there will be more covers that kind of fit into it. This is like the boys' side, and we have Fanny here kind of dressed as a man, which feels a bit weird. Jim Crow, and King Mob's chest. He looks very hot, doesn't he? It's really nice. Great cover by Sean Phillips if you like men's chests, which, I like mine. I don't, it's horrible. So Terminal City, so maybe City and Terminal. So in terms of coming to the end, but also within this kind of particular urban embeddedment that we've been dealing with, i.e., this kind of issue of uh, Britain coalescing around its urban centres, right? I mean, that's a little bit of a tweak than what we've really been talking about for the past few months, but maybe that's how it ties in. It's only an advert in the comic. It's not that relevant. Page 1. The idea is, by the way, we're going fast this month. We're going fast. I want this to be over within an hour, and it's appropriate to the issue. We'll get to that. However, the first panels are longer. It's a dawdler, this first panel. So if you go back to, so we're in London, obviously, that's St. Paul's. We're looking at it from the sort of looks like we're sort of in the middle of the river, looking northward at St. Paul's. Then this is east of St. Paul's, east of St. Paul's. So we're kind of in the city somewhere. And this is where Jim Crow and Ragged Robin have gone to find to find Fanny and King Mob, right? We know that, so there's been two sort of one-off issues which have kind of broken the flow. But basically, these guys have been looking for King Mob and Lord Fanny, who were shot and kidnapped way back at the end of Lord Fanny's arc months ago. And they're just about to kind of go and get them, basically. And that's the 3-part storyline conclusion thing that we're building up to. So, this shot of St. Paul's, look at the cloud. See this big, so we've got this brilliantly coloured, actually, like orange skyline. Remember how so kind of over here, you'd find Canary Wharf, right? Which is where Jack, Stroke Dane, and Mad Tom jumped off the top of in order to kind of break through into the next universe, and we saw what happened to Jack in that universe last episode. But if you cast your mind further back to issue 3, isn't it, where Jack gets pigeon eyes and goes on a kind of a pigeon flight through the city of London. Not only does he go to St. Paul's, but there's an archonic creature, like a kind of like the bad juju of the city of London, and it's a bad juju kind of crawling or squatting atop St. Paul's here, and it's that cloud, right? Like it's still there. It's still there in this panel. Also, this is where Dane underwent a lot of his initiatory moments during those first 4 issues. There is a very similar shot drawn by the same artist that we're dealing with this week, Steve Yoel, of where the only kind of real anchor, or like a commonplace that you've got a topos that you've got to know where you are in London, is just this kind of very similar looking shot of St. Paul's, right? So it's the heart of Great Britain, obviously, or the Omphalos. I'm doing brilliant on my Greek terms tonight, aren't I? Amazing. So we're kind of back where we started in some way, but we're also in the heart of the beast, right? And indeed, we've still got the orange skies, brilliant colouring, really nice, and the cloud here, and we've got Ragged Robin and Jim Crow. They've arrived, and they are talking about this place here, the House of Fun, which is basically where they think Fanny and King Mob are being held. We know that they're being held in like a scary kind of government installation, and this is perhaps this is the spoilers. This is the front. This is the kind of the entranceway. It's a scary joke shop. I think this is reasonably sort of British institution. You don't really get them anymore, or not institution. That's the wrong word, but like a British phenomenon. You don't get it anymore. But and we had one like in the way of the town where I live currently, and have lived for a while. My home, I guess you'd call it. Somebody kind of tried to open like a retro, creepy, like a kind of like a retro creepy joke shop, which you used to get a lot of in seaside towns right up into the 70s and 80s. Like what 10, 15, 10, 12 years ago, which doesn't seem like a long time to me, but it was a long time ago. No, my kid would have been alive, so it was 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. And it didn't last for long, but respect to the guy, he had managed to perfectly recreate how scary a joke shop is or was. You don't really get them anymore. But these are these used to be like a thing, not just in seaside towns, but mainly in seaside towns. And you'd go and you just get novelties, whoopee cushions and masks and sweets that make your tongue go green and smelly things and fake turds and uh, stuff. And for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason is. I think the reason is that like beyond a certain age, if you're well into practical jokes, especially like these really horrible, like cheap plasticky ones, which would just have this incredibly sort of vibe about them. If you're into that kind of practical jokery stuff, beyond a certain age, it means that you're really sinister, doesn't it? And so to be an adult running a shop like that and surrounded by all of these incredibly sort of volatile, bad vibe machines, uh, it means that is gonna get to you, and indeed, it is gonna get to the space where they're held. And this is like you feel it in this issue. No, you don't necessarily feel it, but the issue does make it quite plain that this is a thing, and that's it's interesting that this joke shop frontage, which if you're of a certain age and can remember when these things were a thing, and I'm not saying they aren't a thing at all, it's just that they're obviously much rarer than they were 20, 25 years ago. 25 to 30 to 40 years ago. If you can remember that feeling, then all of the other stuff later on in the issue about what's happening to this environment and how it's kind of changing in response to the baddies that have turned up, a joke shop. And that's a very tangible way of being able to represent that feeling. Like I know obviously in the comic it's worse, but like the kind of bad vibe space that's being described in this issue, if you say how that horrible feeling when you go into a joke shop, it's like, oh yeah, I do, yeah, okay, it's like that, okay. So that's good. And indeed the vibes coming off this place are so strong that Robin, who's telepathically sensitive, has been sick. Jim Crow is a bit like, oh, we got to be careful of this. So they found the place, but they're not quite. But they're not just charging in because they know they need to sort of work out some strategy and make themselves safe before going in. And as Fanny says, what the hell is in there? It's a good question. I like on this page the framing of the view between these kind of stacks of rubbish. Reminds you of the stacks of rubbish that Dane McGowan was thrown into when he was being initiated around this space, as if we have perhaps been here before, quite literally. And the background on this panel here, panel 3, these kind of, you do still get them, but they're definitely kind of like preserved, like they're like deliberately preserved now. The city of London is obviously like hyper modern skyscrapers and office buildings and stuff. But because it's ancient land, basically there are streets that are tiny and kind of quaint in a very like preserved and done and obviously expensive way. There is like a square foot there is one of the more expensive square feet on the planet. But Steve Yeowell has caught the kind of the quaintness of one of these horrible little city streets, like literally city with a capital C streets, very well. Okay, that was longer than I thought it was going to take. On to page 2. It's our splash page, and we've got Miss Dwyer and the Archon, the King of All Tears. They're sure about. Do you remember last time we saw Miss Dwyer? She had put on this kind of black insectoid, not like nano armor. She had sort of put it on. It sort of grown out of her. She'd morphed, I think is the word that we would have used at the time. She did some morphing. Okay. So that, and the title, we have the title here, House of Fun, with the keyhole motif on the O in house. And we've got our credits box. Let's do the credits. We've got Grant Morrison, writer, Steve Yeowell, penciler, Dick Giordano, inker, Daniel Vozzo, colours and separations, Clem Robbins, letterer, Shelley Roberg, editor, and the Invisibles are created by Grant Morrison. Now, so this is quite interesting, isn't it? This is like proper inside baseball geek shit. So do squiddle ahead if you need to. But Steve Yeowell, who was the initial artist of the series. If anybody kind of he was basically drew. I don't know. He kind of co-designed at least and drew and kind of realised the characters and tone of the book more than anybody really. Oh well, yeah, more than anybody. And first, importantly, he's back. Now, my understanding is this isn't kind of like a editorial decision to have the guy from before back. The book is going through all sorts of trials and tribulations at this point, and indeed the fact that it's got a July '96 cover date on it, it could have been much later than that. So it might not have come out around my 80th birthday at all. But basically, for reasons that we'll get to, for reasons that we'll get to next month. I don't think we're going to get to them this month for reasons. But for reasons to do with Grant Morrison's health, the comic was really late. So they were basically going, things are a bit disrupted. We need artists who can work fast and kind of unpredictably, because they might only get a couple of pages worth of script to work on at a time between Morrison's ability to turn them in and not. And Steve Yeowell was available basically, and he's fast. So even though he's back, and he kind of in this book, it does sort of belong to him in a way like it doesn't belong to many other people. It doesn't feel like it belongs to him at the moment. It's like things have changed with the design, and the characters, and the look and feel, and he's obviously very rushed. So in order to and the art in these pages it looks rushed, right? It's not, if you compare it to the first couple of issues of Yeowell's issue 1 and 2, like Yeowell's initial issues, it's very different. And this is much more like, obviously has had less time spent on it. It's rushed, which isn't to say it isn't good. In fact, it has a certain quality, which we get to when you mentioned the inker, Dick Giordano. Now he's like, legend. He's not with us any longer, bless him. But the word legend is not too strong a word to use at all. He was an artist working kind of both for Marvel and DC, working throughout the US comics industry. He's so at this point in their careers, like Morrison and Yeowell have been professional comic book artists for about 10 to 12 years. For Giordano, it's easily, it's getting on for 40. So his career started in the late 50s as a professional comic book artist. So he's from an incredibly different generation, different sensibility, if you like, to Morrison and Yeowell. And what am I trying to say? So you get a guy in like for Giordano, it's just a job of work, right? Yep, just get through it. Yep, give me the pages, I'll link them. Yep, brilliant. So he's been called in because he's fast and reliable too. And obviously, just like, he's just on the Rolodex, right? We need an inker. Call Dick Giordano. He'll fit it in. He'll get it done. It'll be okay. It'll be passable, no matter what. And indeed, it is now. Kind of Yeowell's style. I mean, I'm kind of wrong here, but Yeowell's style kind of tends to sort of pinpoint something on the page or in the panel. Tends to sort of pick an object or an item or a point, and the panels kind of work their way out from that. Giordano's very different. Comes from he kind of reached his apotheosis in the 70s, you'd say, with his work on Neil Adams's X-Men comics and things. And his inks are they're about working with the flow of the page. So they move from top to bottom and left to right in this very sort of read this way kind of way. Not to say that it's directive or like formulaic or controlling. Whereas Yeowell's work seems to coalesce on a point, Giordano's work is always in motion. It's always traveling from one point to another, and that creates quite an interesting tension. You'd say in the pages that follow art-wise, they don't look amazing, but they do read really well. This is like a pretty straightforward action issue, or kind of like superhero rhythm comic. It's got those kind of beats in it, and it reads fast, which is why I'm trying to do this review fast. But it reads fast and it moves fast, and the art moves fast in this issue. You can see, and I haven't read the next two issues yet, so I'm not sure whether the kind of the speed that they have to work at does kind of actually get to them and make them struggle a bit with the quality. But at the moment, just like the rhythm of the reading of these pages to follow, that Yeowell and kind of Giordano have kind of accidentally worked out between them, is great. Real pace to it, real sort of flow. Really, like it's accidentally quite interesting work, even though it doesn't look like it. Do you know what I mean? But when you're reading it, you'll feel it. Okay, and we've got so so Miss Dwyer's armor definitely doesn't look as good as it did when we saw Phil Jimenez drawing it at the end of the King Mob arc 3 issues ago. And it's much more just like generic bad guy superhero bug armor, whereas before it was the design was quite different and much more sort of much more interesting, really. And they've kind of simplified it into just like it's kind of black armor with like a bug motif, and it doesn't really look that good. And if you look closely, you'll see that like the way that Miss Dwyer's body here is twisted is quite horrible, and also the angles that we're working on here, like she's crawling on a wall. So like you're not quite sure where like flat is meant to be here. It's quite nicely done. It's quite disorienting. But yeah, and this kind of reflects. So yeah, it's a shame that we've lost the kind of the quality of Jimenez's work on the design of this scary baddie, because he becomes a bit less scary and a bit more just like a baddie wearing armor, like wearing bug armor. That looks a bit daft. Bug lady. But it's not. But it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so on to page 3. Miss Dwyer and the King of All Tears, and then we get these. You can see them. You get these very like packed captions of I don't know. Like there is definitely a word for this. I just don't know what the word is. It's like 90s speed rap comic book captions. So like it's kind of riffing on the work from the 1970s of like writers like Don McGregor and Jim Starlin, who would do this basically, who would have kind of the pages, and then their job as a writer was to sort of like like jam in loads of words onto the page in increasingly bizarre and kind of ridiculous sometimes configurations. With this kind of like breathless, very overblown, very like big prose, and sometimes it just works brilliantly, and sometimes if you can get into the rhythm of this kind of like almost like declamatory chanting sort of pace that the best of this work has, it's very interesting and works really well. And then kind of Alan Moore sort of reinvented it in a kind of like a kind of a purple prose kind of style, with a lot more sort of like Anglo classicism to it. Beyond the kind of the much more sort of rough and ready, like say, like sort of speed rap vibes that you would get from the comic book artists of the 70s, comic book writers of the 70s. And Morrison is doing his version of it here. Now he's not Morrison and Alan Moore, and Pete Milligan and John Smith all did this, and they were kind of like a very similar generation, part of the same cohort of British authors who kind of influenced American comic books. In the late 80s and early 90s. And what am I trying to say is like it's bad, but in a good way, or it's good in a bad way. I don't know. It's very kind of like hyper. The world that was facets, honeycombed by her compound eyes, she scuttles through a jeweled maze of appalling new colours, vast perfumes, and grotesque emotions. Optic lenses morph is the most 90s word. Morph to accommodate changes in the light-stained glass vision, migraine agony on overdrive. Everything seems sickening artificial. Her remade palette clickers and whirs. The hymns of her order self-replicate through the building, making it resonate like a hive. But it serves a purpose. And the purpose isn't just this kind of like, whoa, we're in psychedelic sci-fi territory. But it does introduce an effective kind of position of alienness into the object, into the text, right, into the narrative. She's a bug lady, and what it basically says. So we've got Miss Dwyer and we've got the King of All Tears, and they are kind of like moving down the corridors to go and fuck with Lord Fanny and King Mob, who have remember busted out basically. They can probably also sense that because they can see through time and stuff. They can probably sense that the other invisible cavalry is kind of on the way. At her side, the King of All Tears, god of the endless iron room, manifesting in earth plane matter. the warning siren of his voice rising and falling, activating the 14 chakras and hyperchakras in his spinal lattice, each lamenting outcry carefully modulated to program his nanofactories with dynamic mobile blueprints of a more welcoming environment. So he comes from like other space, right? He comes from like above space because he's basically just a magical demon. And she's like his kind of magical demon servant, a bit less magical, a bit more fleshy. But he comes from an entirely other plane of matter, and so he's reprogramming. He's basically releasing nanomachines that are changing reality itself to make his form stable within this local area, right? Within this space. Contagion takes, contagion spreads, contagion rages along precise parameters. Now, I'm not as down about the plague this weekend as I was last time I had one of these in the last episode, Issuesode. So if I was, and I'd read this, contagion takes, contagion spreads, contagion rages along precise parameters, which is, see, it's got like, has got that real like beat madness in a good way as you read it. The world begins to sicken and change. If I'd read that in the depths of plague depression last month, I'd have been like, that's pretty timely. Now it is pretty timely, and the kind of does speak to the wider point about the 2020, the long 2020 plague, and the way that the kind of these microorganisms literally reprogram reality around themselves. So we might not have caught the plague and died. Touch wood, thank God. My heartfelt, to everybody who has lost someone. That's not the problem. Or that's not the thing that happens, those deaths, although obviously they affect what is the real thing, which is what comes next, which is the fact that these microorganisms have changed the world while you were surviving the plague, right? Surviving plague obviously means just like literally staying indoors in this case, while the world is subtly reprogrammed through basically the kind of the action of these tiny nanomachines, right? So that's quite on it. And when, like ages ago, when the plague first happened, and we were still, we were on issue 10 or whatever, this was in my mind, this scene that I know about, contagion. I know what it does. It changes the world, and that's been my biggest concern, honestly, since the whole goddamn thing kicked off. Over onto page 4, we've got King Mob and Lord Fanny. So if you remember, basically, she's rescuing him. He's naked and dying, and she's being funny, and he's being a bit kind of he's still being sarcastic. He refers to himself as having got a punctured lung and having lost enough blood to keep the fucking vampire Lestat, happy for a month. That's a 90s reference to Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicle novels. I don't know if you've seen Interview with a Vampire lately. If you haven't, I suggest you do, because it's very funny. So they're kind of both a bit like, holy shit, we're really fucked up. And yet they're still kind of keeping their black sense of humour about them, which is very good. And King Mob says, can you hear that? What's that noise? Can you hear that? Insects. And Fanny says, it's not insects. There's something in here with us, something that shouldn't be in the world, right? So we've got insect, which is like the type of, we've spoken about this before for sure, but like the type of intelligence that the Archons and their minions kind of seem to favor or prefer, or seem to kind of have, is an insectoid one, right? So it's kind of like many apparently individual nodes responding to a highly centralized intelligence, basically. That's what they're about. And so we've got these giant kind of insect queen or king and the drone, basically trying to turn our entire universe into a hive for them. And that's a motif that we'll come across a lot. Ooh, we're only on page 5. Or, sorry, not page 5, but we're already over the page and we're having our first advert break. It's our visit to Sam Goody Music Land, pardon me. Good and Cocky is the headline strapline thing. and we've got these chickens or cocks, I guess you'd say, and sacrifice, like kind of like demonic, not demonic, but like blood sacrifice is what these cocks mean in the. It's good fun to say cocks, isn't it? In the context of the issue, the albums. So, Tracy Bonham, The Burdens of Being Upright, and Pulp, Different Class. I listened to the Tracy Bonham record. I liked it. I thought it was good. It is a bit like Alanis Morissette, which is the kind of comparison that Tracy Bonham has had ever since 1996, and is probably bloody sick of it. However, it is a bit true. She does sound a bit like them, but I preferred it to Alanis Morissette. Her vibe is much less like screamy, and there seems to be it's more rocky basically, and a bit more punky, and yeah, she seems to have a more authentic. She basically, yeah, there's some good like crunch on some of like the rocking out bits, and it is basically 90s rock, 90s American sort of alt rock. So it goes like quite a bit, loud bit. And she sort of shrieks a bit, but not in an off-putting way. It does sound a bit like, it sounds like decent early PJ Harvey, and the bits that rock out in a way which is satisfying. It feels much less kind of FM radio than Alanis Morissette would, for instance. So I mean, like I thought it was right. I quite enjoyed it. Tracy Bonham, The Burdens of Being Upright. I think it's okay. Give it a listen. And the other one, yeah, God, Different Class by Pulp. Now, God, I could talk about this for hours. What to say about that? It's got Pulp's best song on it, which is Underwear. Like, I didn't listen to this record again because I know it very, very well from back when all this happened. Now, the hot take on Pulp is, and I'm sure I've said this before because I tell everybody this if they talk to me for more than 10 minutes. Pulp are basically a Blairite human league, and who needs that? Yeah, that's the quick fuck off to Pulp that they don't get enough, frankly. Like, they really do deserve that. And and their music's okay, but it's not it's much better as like an idea of really good pop music than like really good pop music when you actually listen to it, except for a few exceptions. They did have a few decent tracks, but they were all before this, apart from Underwear, which is the best Pulp song and is on this album. All of their other best music is on prior albums to this. And what this one replaces their best work with is a number of like anthemic songs. This was a huge hit. This album, and made them into legends, and gave them a reputation that they're still really coasting on. 30 years later, over 25 years later, and yeah, it's awful, and I don't just mean in terms of the sound, although the sound is a bit now, and his kind of like Jarvis Cocker's, the lead singer of Pops, his mannerisms, like I'm over that. Like, and if you're not, you should be. But and that gets really wearing. But there are 4 songs on this record. There is and they were all massive hits. There's Sorted for Ease and With, Disco 2000, Common People, and Misshapes. And they basically destroyed the world between them, those 4 songs. Now, in 1995, so the summer before this advert came out, a year before this advert came out, I saw Pulp replacing the Stone Roses, which isn't insignificant, at the Glastonbury Festival in midsummer '95, right? And 2 of my best buddies in the whole world, who I didn't know yet, were there too, and we were all at this festival watching this band at the same time, and I kind of treasure that moment because these 2 chaps that I love very much were there, and I was there, and it all kind of fit together. I was there with other friends too, but I've got these other good friends who I didn't know, but we all were there, and we all had this experience, even though we wouldn't know each other for years to come. So that's good. But that moment, that performance, kind of signals the death of not just rave culture, but of the kind of the musical counterculture as such, as it had been, as of like rock, as it had been, well, like rock and roll, pop and rock, as it had been figured since, the early 1960s, really. So for 30 years, Pulp kind of just like kill it all off with that big, that big ritual performance in the Pyramid stage at Glastonbury in 1995. Um, the four songs, which are like the kind of the anchor songs of this album, so Different Class is like this uh, awful track about like nostalgia for a party that you haven't had yet, which which just kind of kind of makes it okay to sort of enjoy the nostalgia mode. See Frederick Jameson, etc. Um, in a way which British pop had resisted prior to that. Common People and Misshapes refigure like genuine class consciousness and class struggle as a series of aesthetic choices, which was which is like arch Blairism, arch Thatcherism, and has been incalculably harmful to um the life outcomes of like working people in the UK. Basically, the fact that Pulp did this enormously sort of influential cultural influencing piece, which said class isn't about your material relationship to the means of production or to the means of accumulation or anything like that. It's about whether you wear sort of ironic tracksuit tops or not. That's that's the real social cleavage in Britain now, and people went for that like you wouldn't believe, and it was really harmful for breaking like the labor movement, progressive politics, even like liberal democracy in the UK. It was incalculably bad to have this sensibility emerge and be given jaunty tunes. And the other one, Sorted for Reason, is basically like this kind of it's basically this like bringing inside of what had been the outside of rave culture. Now, I'm not saying that rave culture was utopian, and it was, and it was highly kind of Thatcherite in its own way in terms of the way that people were, you know, selling drugs and making money through like highly deregulated processes and stuff. Like so much of like what rave was about that. The people organising these parties were not doing it for like utopian dreams. Nevertheless, it did create utopian spaces outside of, if not outside of capital, then outside of capital plus, right? You were able to kind of through this kind of like entrepreneurial space, you were being sold what was an authentic outside experience, like literally outside in terms of on a good day being in a field or in a warehouse, whatever, but being outside of the usual run of the mill quotidian existence, you would feel a common or utopian purpose, right? And that was a good thing. But then, basically, by being a bit like bringing like a wry eye and an ironic sensibility to it, Jarvis Cocker sort of just kills that off with the song "Sorted for Reason Wiz" and applies this horrible sort of like sort of really studied sort of like Alan Bennett-esque kind of let's make something, let's make everything banal uh, vibe. And literally, it's a literal kind of act of enclosure. He suddenly takes this thing which was very big and important and meaningful for lots of people, and goes, "Actually, it was a bit rubbish, and you shouldn't be into that because you know, uh, he really goes out of his way to sort of the kind of the purpose of the song is like the lyrics of the song are like, uh, tomorrow you come down, and it's a bit like, well, that's not the point. The point is that in the moment you're in the moment, and the fact that you have to the fact that the light dies is the thing you have to rage against, right? And he kind of goes, well, the light dies. So what was the point in ever in there being light if it dies? Do you know what I mean? And I hate that. Like, I fucking hate that. It seems he kind of forecloses so much potential, and literally encloses and brings indoors into pubs and clubs where, like I say, it would have existed before in fields and warehouses. It brings in the all of the money making entrepreneurialism of the, not just the rave scene, but like the British festival scene itself. Like Pulp's appearance at Glastonbury is the point where the commercialization of festival culture is like green lit. Basically, that's where it happens, where it initiates, and it's terrible. It's really bad. It did a lot of harm. Like, this is a highly toxic record, and despite the fact that it's got one banging tune on it, a few other ones where you're like, and then four absolute abominations, which nevertheless, they're thinkers. They get, they're powerful, bad juju. Yeah. So that's what this record is. And don't get me started on Common People or Misshapes. I mean, terrible, terrible. Like, over the page, girl, teenage propaganda. It's a advert for a Vertigo Verite number. The last exit from Bollockstown, UK, is right inside her head. Peter Milligan, Bunker Credit. I've never read this. It looks brilliant, frankly. The last exit from Bollockstown, UK, is right inside her head. That's if you imagine that this is basically Jack Frost. She's wearing a 90s t-shirt like he is. So and she's got 90s hair like he has. Yeah, that's why that connects here. And she's throwing a brick to smash in a shop window or something, which is something that our Jack Frost in this very comic like to do. If I do see this around, I will definitely buy it because it looks great. Fagredo is brilliant artist. Peter Milligan was at the height of his powers here, which means that his writing could be the best thing you've ever read, or it could just kind of go well. It could just completely miss, and that's part of the fun. So I will check it out as soon as I can, which isn't likely to be very anytime soon. Over the page, we're still with Fanny and King Mob, and they're ill. And the best, and it's amusing, and this goes on throughout the issue. You can't you can't have penises. Can't have penises in comics. So there's funny blocking of how naked, bleeding to death King Mob's Willie isn't being seen, just because of like the funny positioning of his body. And they can feel. Fanny says, "I'm starting to feel sick." And is it just me, or is the corridor getting bigger? They're beginning to notice the effects of reality itself at the matter level, at the table tapping level, changing. Back outside, Ragged Robin and Jim Crow basically go through what is a fair, it's great the way that Morrison does this. He basically tells you how to do street magic, not like close up street magic where you surprise drunk people with a card trick, but like how to and you do have to have done a bit. You have to have done it before, like Jim Crow obviously has, and sort of know what you're doing. But basically, you do this. Basically, get some cheap booze and some tobacco and some chalk or spray paint or whatever. Muck about. Next thing you know, you've actually got a god on your shoulders, which is the kind of like prep that they need to take on the house. So Jim Crow kind of welcomes Papa Gede into his, like he did in his issue back in issue 11 or whatever it was, 10 maybe. 10. It doesn't matter. He gets ridden again by his spirit patron Papa Gede, the opener of the gate. He kind of asks him here to kind of give him a big dick, which is funny. Guozozo, s'il vous plaît. Ma papa te reconnaît-moi. Guozozo, s'il vous plaît. The spider behind the cross. Good. Yeah, they do champagne and rum magic, and now Jim is kind of all charged up. Over the next page, we're back with Robin and we're back with Fanny and King Mob. This is on page 8 now, and there's this horrible look at King Mob's hand, and they're getting cancer, is what it is. It's some kind of magical look. It's spreading. It's just they basically have noticed these kind of growths on their body. It's horrible. And Fanny says this is some kind of magical attack, but I'm not sure how to counter it. I'm all itchy and sore. Basically, and that's and how the warped reality affects the human body is by giving it these horrible tumorous growths. And we go, and so they kind of like fuck, and they go back into the room, the torture chamber where King Mob just escaped from. And we've got Dr. Franklin's amusing dead body here, and the way that it kind of don't really get why the lighting change here, other than that's quicker to draw. And maybe don't see how Fanny blocking the potential light source. It just like this. It doesn't make sense other than he's not observing. Like he's alone here, and so he's kind of, and so as a dead man, he is kind of visible in an empty room. He's not in an empty room though because Sir Miles is still in there. But yeah, but like I don't know what the meaning is of him going black here at this point, of him just like being enveloped in shadow. This is, and then over onto the next page, we've got an advert for Seekers into the Mystery. We've kind of talked about this before. It's the Invisibles for boring people, but it's still the Invisibles, right? So the connection is here. Obviously, this guy's an angel stroke grey alien, and he's got holding the world like a bowling ball. And that's quite useful for understanding of this issue a bit, right? In the same way that the King of all Tears, the Archon, is like doing what manipulating the material plane. So is this one here, right? So he's what is good? What is evil? What is an angel? What is a demon? That kind of thing, right? But it's a really good picture. Really good picture of a alien grey in a skirt holding the earth like a bowling ball. It's really good. Yeah. When Lucas Hart got to heaven, the angels weren't exactly what he'd expected. Yeah, I mean, don't buy the comic. Good advert though. Oh, over the page, Books of Magic. We don't talk about Books of Magic adverts in this podcast, as you may know. Tim Hunter's gone to America, gone to San Francisco, in fact. So there is a connection there, because all of this digital viral malarkey comes from there, right? So King Mob and Lord Fanny are back in the room, the torture chamber, and Sir Miles, who he hasn't seen for months, is just kind of like squirming, basically, on the torture chair. Remember that King Mob was ripped off his aura, and now he's just kind of, and it's not quite clear why he's so disabled, but he is. And they like check him, and like they're covered in tumors by this point, which is horrible. Like the kind of the nano rewriting machines that are loose in the local environment are killing Mob and Fanny very quickly. But King Mob does, but Sir Miles doesn't have them, and he doesn't explain it here, but on the next page. So basically, okay, we'll jump ahead and cut back. So for the next 3 pages, there's some good banter and good jokes, and this is good action and it's good sort of superhero problem solving logic thinking by King Mob. Proving that even though he's literally got cancer and dying, he's still no slouch. He's still smart and able to win. So Miles goes, "I'm not getting cancer." While because the Archon is changing the universe or the local reality grid, I'm not getting cancer because of the black milk that he drank from Miss Dwyer. Remember when to juice up his psychic powers earlier? So he's got nanomachines in his blood, which is sending out friendly signals to the nanomachines that are changing the local environment. So they're leaving him alone. The Lord Mob and Fanny obviously don't have those nanomachines, so they use the syringes which are lying all over the table, suck out some of Sir Miles's blood and inject it into themselves. So now they've got the nanomachines in them, and they're sending out friendly signals to stop the nanomachines from giving them cancer, right? And King Mob makes a crack about who'd have thought we'd have ended up blood brothers, Sir Miles? And it's a bit like, well, you're not, because he hasn't got any of your blood in him, so you're not blood brothers. not just somebody else's blood. You have to swap it. Anyway, but before, okay, and then back. So that's what happens on pages 9, 10, and 11. It's just like it's good. It's good, like superhero action scene stuff. It's fine. But we do get when they're going, what's going on? Why have we got cancer? Sir Miles does explain to them, and he says he gives away some sort of stuff about the nature of the Archon, which is quite interesting. He says it's them, Miss Dwyer and that thing. It's one of them, one of the Archons, the kings of the earth. I believe your people call them the Lost Ones. Now, that was the rabbit hole for me this week, this episode. Unfortunately for you, I had quite a good time. She brought down the Archon, and now he's reconfiguring the molecular structure of everything in this building. They have difficulty operating in our world, so they change it using micro-organic factories. Right? So we're not even going to get into like how mechanized production per se is an archonic influence upon the human life wave stroke planet Earth. Despite everything, I'm still prepared to say that modernity works or can work, and I'm not going neo-primitivist even after all this bollocks. But neither would I deny that the that industrialization as such is archonic. I think that's unfortunately true. I believe your people call them the Lost Ones. So Invisibles call Archons the Lost Ones. Now, I didn't draw much attention to this in the previous episode because I didn't really notice it, to be honest. But I did remember it. I just didn't think much of it at the time. But when Jack is just after Jack has jumped off Canary Wharf and he had the flashback where he kind of remembered this repressed memory in the last issue, right? And he meets Barbalith for the first time, or at least he kind of remembers meeting Barbalith for the first time. Barbalith calls him, the first thing Barbalith says to him, he says, "Lost one, welcome home." Barbalith calls Jack a lost one. Barbalith is the kind of godhead of the Invisible's spirituality system, and they also call the Archons lost ones. So is Jack an Archon? Is he a baddie? Is Jack an Archon? Why are they called the lost ones? And that kind of, I don't know, I kind of started thinking, why the lost ones? Why are they called that? Where is that from? What's it doing? What does it mean? There's an amazing poem called The Lost Ones by Francis Ledwidge. I think it was written or published in about 1912. Ledwidge was a working class man who grew up in County Meath or something, but like in Ireland, and kind of very sort of like humble beginnings, but was an incredibly talented poet, and caught the attention of Lord Dunsany, red flag, who kind of like was his patron to let him become a poet, basically. Dunsany is like deep Masonic mysticism and sort of like Anglo-Irish imperialism, basically Irish traitors who support a crown. Like Dunsany's work isn't without literary merit, obviously, but the work that it does is bad. Now, this poem, "The Lost Ones" by Francis Ledwidge. I might read the whole thing. I haven't quite got the rhythm. I've got the rhythm in my head, but I haven't got the rhythm in my mouth yet. So I'm going to get it wrong. So this rhymes, but it might not sound like it rhymes, right? Somewhere is music from the linnet's bills, and through the sunny flowers the bee-wings drone, and white bells of convolvulus on hills of quiet May make silent ringing blown. Hither and thither by the wind of showers, and somewhere all the wandering birds have flown, and the brown breath of autumn chills the flowers. But where are all the loves of long ago? O little twilight ship, blown up the tide? Where are the faces laughing in the glow of morning years, the lost ones scattered wide? Give me your hand, O brother, let us go, crying about the dark for those who died. Now, like, sorry to all you Irish fellas out there, but Irish poets are always writing about Ireland when they're writing when they're writing poems, right? Certainly avowed nationalists at this point, um, like Ledwidge. Uh, so, and I don't mind being a problem solver poet guy. I think that's fine. I think a good poet, a good poem does have a mystery in it that you can probe and unravel to some degree. That's part of the fun. It's part of the point. But I mean, The Lost Ones is a brilliant poem because it's just beautiful. The stuff about the white bells of convolvulus and hills, through the sunny flowers, the bee wings drone. So there's obviously this kind of insectoid motif that we've got here, and basically the Lost Ones are two or three things, right? Aren't they? They're basically the Irish dead, which means the kind of the Irish dead from empire, whether that means that they're lost insofar as they're, like I say, dead, or just have left and are part of the diaspora. Where have they gone, for instance? Where are all the loves of long ago? We're basically talking about either Irish people who died in the famine and the massacres of the British and buggered off, or we're talking about kind of their spiritual forebears. This is a Celtic twilight kind of poem, and so the lost ones are, as much as they might be people or the spirits of dead people, they're also potentially just what you might call fairies, gentlefolk. Where are the faces laughing in the glow of morning years, the lost ones scattered wide? Oh, brother, let us go crying about the dark for those who died. So we're finding here that, the lost ones are kind of absent beings, right? Who, because they're lost, kind of need to be found, right? They need to be sort of they need to be brought back into awareness because they're gone from awareness, and that creates a loss, yeah, and a loss which is felt by people like Ledwidge and well, not Dunsany really, I would have thought, but Yeats and so on. Yeah, like that kind of like the fairies are dead and we've got to get them back thing is hashtag important. Um, and so that felt pretty good. That felt like I'd got a good angle on why the Lost Ones, the Archons and the Invisibles are called the Lost Ones. I thought this poem had a good answer for that. Oh yeah, there's also this bit in the somewhere all the wandering birds have flown, and the brown breath of autumn chills the flowers. Now that definitely brings to mind to me the lines of Shelley's poem. Oh, I haven't got them to hand, but the lines of Shelley's poem that is it called Lines Composed in the Augean Hills? Is it that one? Basically, when he's mourning, and it's kind of issue 8 of the Invisibles, I guess, where he's mourning, but he kind of puts his grief to one side and kind of has a cuddle with Mary, and that's nice. But there's that, and it's the most terrifying sequence in the Invisibles to me. The bit where Jane, their friend, like the other girl that they used to hang out with, kind of takes the remaining Shelley child away, kind of into these browning autumn leaves, and kind of like hints at this like very kind of potential child sacrificey undercurrent underlying this, or at least sort of blood sacrificey thing underlying this entire sort of Invisibles scheme and project. That really kind of comes through in the brown breath of autumn chilling the flowers in this poem. But the Lost Ones thing, and obviously you got the heavy Catholic vibes that Dane had last episode, and the heavy Irish vibes that kind of necessarily comes with, because remember all of this is happening in London by way of Liverpool. We'll get to that. But remember that there's this Liverpool thing. There's this kind of this Irish beachhead on the English mainland thing. Um, and yeah, and then the other big reference that I kind of hoiked up for the Lost Ones then was Samuel Beckett's 1966 short story, The Lost Ones, which is kind of his, which is, yeah, it's deep Beckett, basically. Um, very, like, basically it's this kind of nightmare dystopia book, not kind of like a political dystopia or anything, but like he basically just writes about this space, which is like a small cylinder where several hundred people are kind of just like crammed in, and they're literally like this close to each other, and they kind of shuffle around walking, and some of them are kind of old and sort of have to sort of just stay, and there are ladders leading up the walls, which leads to small sort of cells, or just kind of like small like caves in the wall of this cylinder that they all live in, where they can make, where you can just kind of, you can just hide in the cylinder for a bit, to escape from the fact that everyone's just here all the time. And they just walk around endlessly, and they're never fed, and the like basically every 10 seconds it goes light and dark again, and the temperature goes up and down again like it would over the course of a day. So they're humans kind of, or like human like bodies, human like thoughts in hell, basically, in just this unspeakably awful, radically alienated space where they just kind of have to. They don't even cope. They're just entirely abject. They're just completely without hope, living in this horrible kind of Beckett nightmare space. These people, probably these people, are the lost ones. Obviously, with Beckett, it's never that quite simple. And there's like there are hints that like again, this is about Ireland because like there's this kind of there's a like the only like human concept which is kind of mentioned within this space is the north, right? And it's kind of it's a point by which people can find where they are. Is this one woman who's lying or kind of crouching against the wall like this? She's north because she's the one person that they can all identify, um, or one of two people. The other one is like an obvious like Virgin Mary woman. I am aware that by trying to solve the puzzle of this book, rather than just kind of enjoying the sense of grim alienation that you get from the purity of the prose, I'm committing the ultimate anti-Beckettian sin. I don't care, because you know, because why would I? It's just a kind of a right on a grift. It's fine. You don't have to listen to them. His kind of, yeah. So like the fact that I'm saying, well, what does this mean symbolically? He would go, no, that's not the point. That's not what I'm doing. But it was, and it's one of those ones that, in his kind of insistence that like uh, style, like any kind of adornment of language, serves to uh, separate the reader from the truth of language even further, because they've got this terrible kind of worry about language not being sufficient to be being a form of mediation, right? Not being the object itself that the language is describing. And it's a bit like, well, that's fine because it's just language. This is what we're playing with here. You don't have to be really like radically alienated and just like breaking your brain about it. You just have to, you just have to accept that that's what the game is. But the Lost One, and that's called the Lost Ones because these people are very obviously lost, and it again it has a bit of an insectoidy feel about it because these ladders leading up the hills to these sort of eremitic cells. There's this sense that they could be, obviously Catholic Ireland, could be monks in a monastery shuffling around in kind of low murmuring silence in the cold, and climbing a ladder to go and hide in a cell uh, for a while. Um, that these cells could also be like honeycombs. They could also be these people could be insects. They could be bees, in fact, a bit like the bee wings droning in the Ledwidge poem, or the scary black armor bug lady uh, rewriting reality in this issue of the Invisibles. And I think that there's kind of like, so you're the other kind of Beckett thing, and I'm a bit like, is this, so like mid-90s psychedelic adventurer Grant Morrison isn't a Beckett guy, but late 80s wannabe playwright existentialist Grant Morrison definitely was a Beckett guy. Like definitely. So I'm not just, although I don't care whether Morrison accidentally was influenced by Beckett or not, whether he knew that he was. Like the idea that Morrison was pretty familiar with Beckett's work is not weird at all. Um, there's the Beckett thing. There's always a terrible kind of question of who's writing the words that you're reading, who's reading it, and who's the voice of the narrative that's being constructed. Where do these different, you know, dimensional objects sit in relation to the reader and to the writer? And the terrible kind of disconnect between these dimensions is kind of like the essence of existentialist doubt and angst, right? That you can never know who wrote it and who's reading it, and why they can't, and the fact that these things can't connect is, it's like it's the breakage in reality, right? It's like it's kind of the Gnostic curse of reality. It's kind of the fallen nature of the universe. The fact that matter is broken is evinced by the fact that the narrator and the reader, or kind of the author and the reader rather, have got this mediation point of language between them and can't be separate, can't be unseparated, right? Um, so I'm feeling that, and that feels a bit like the way that the Archon can't exist in matter without rewriting matter to suit its own structure. So there's that kind of authorial damage there. This point that like they're, and this kind of like godlessness or ghostlessness in lived reality uh, creates this terrible sense of absence, of loss. And uh, I just think that like The Lost Ones, 1966, Samuel Beckett, might be the most important like work of Gnosticism that I've ever read in my life, frankly. And I think that it does this incredible thing, which like locates both the production and product of what the Archon wants in exactly the same place, and shows you how kind of self-generating and self-perpetuating this universal process of loss and separation is. So the basically like, because you're in this like nightmare space, it's not like you're trying to create a society. This is this cylinder populated by these abject humans, um, or insect, or humans who are insect, um, is both what the Archon wants and the feeling of the people inside it is what the Archon feels. So the Archon is both the subject and the creator of this process. So you, by reading this book, you not only find out what the Archon wants, but also how it feels about it and why. Uh, and yeah, and it's only about 20 pages. It's like a short story, and it's really well worth a read, because the sense of like the Archon kind of lamenting its own, or kind of not lamenting, but suffering its own existence and being helpless but to participate in its own self-creating existence, uh, is terrifying and kind of sad and tangible. And if you ever kind of, and beyond the fact that it is uh, a scary demon monster from a comic book, if you ever wanted to know what, like, where the Archon lives and what it feels like to have that be your existence, you can read The Lost Ones from 1966 by Samuel Beckett, which will tell you in a pretty clear way. Pretty clear. So yeah, check it out. It's worth doing. Okay, so we're on to page 12, 13. Jim does some like crossing of the door here to make it safe to go in. It's not that safe. He kicks the door in after he's done the magic, because there's two different types of magic, right? Or many kinds. And they go into, and the House of Fun is this horrible. There's all these horrible pumpkins on a stick. There's a crucified mouse or rat. There's this kind of like, I was going to say it's unintelligible machinery, but maybe it's sort of looks a bit like a sewing machine. But yeah, it's like a dirty, baddie HQ of the worst kind. This is the Nightmare Castle, and Robin mutters darkly to himself, "Welcome to the House of Fun." It's a song by Madness. It's about being scared to buy condoms, basically, isn't it? And there's a kind of, and it is a good sort of, as much as it's like a cheeky knockabout pop song by Madness, there it does have a slightly kind of manic, frightening energy to it, a bit like the frightening manic energy that you get when you go into a joke shop. A bit like, I'm not going to stretch that too far, but like beyond the fact that like Madness are a good fun time band and House of Fun is the obvious like reference to make if you're in the House of Fun, then then I don't think there's too much of a connection that we need to worry about. I don't think. The word madness is obviously fairly resonant here. Okay, then we're back in Liverpool. We've got a bit of you can tell that this is kind of a flashback. It's not necessarily happening now, but basically Dane says goodbye to his mum. And she's like, don't involve me in this again, but do look after yourself. Because so Dane isn't like reconciled to his mum, but he's separated from, well, they kind of are, but he's kind of separated from her, at least on like terms, right? At least in a way which they can both be like, okay, so we know that this is what I'm doing, right? Because that's kind of, I mean, which is crazy, but it does solve, I know Jack's got a universe to redeem or whatever, but it's also good that his mum isn't worried about him, or at least not worried about him, but like knows what he's up to. And then, as she says, this "look after yourself" for you. You get this pretty. It's a nicely constructed panel about, and it looks a bit like it's happening on a TV set, obviously, but it's also just a panel within a panel within a panel, making Dane's mum's life look to be very small and constricted. A bit. The thing I was just talking about Beckett and the kind of sort of radically alienated, constructed space that the story takes place in. It's a bit like that. It's a bit like why there are these extra panels of containment around Dane's mum's living room. Yeah, that the very deliberate construction of this panels here is one of the things that made me as confident as going with the Beckett thing as I am. And then this kind of happens. This happens again. So this is in a flashback, and then in the real time, you can tell by the difference in the colouring. Mr. Six, who's remember is Jack's old teacher, Jack and Boy, are at the House of Fun too, and it's a bit like, all right, did you get the train? Have you had an awkward train journey? And they go into the House of Fun as well, but they don't do any of the malarkey that Jim and Robin had to do. But maybe that's because Jim and Robin already did it. Yeah, not quite sure. Things will become clear in the next few issues. They walk in, and then Dane walks in, a second behind them, and he's immediately on it by himself. He's immediately lost them because, as we know, this is a sickening and a sickened, not quite normal dimensional space, and so it's all woo in there, and he immediately loses them in kind of like Horrorland. Okay, back in the torture chamber, like amusing shading here because we're not allowed to see King Mob's penis. The cancer that King Mob and Lord Fanny had is clearing up, which is good to know, right? That's nice. No worse than a little touch of prickly heat. Can't believe I've had cancer and been cured in the space of blah, blah, blah. Now, the bit I don't quite get is just because the nanomachines aren't actively turning your body into cancer anymore, like surely your body would still be stuck with the cancer that it's got. And it gets a bit new age there, doesn't it? That like this kind of idea that like in the absence of deliberate kind of like antagonism from outside, your body will just cure its own cancer. And we don't really think that, do we? Don't think that's very right. Miss Dwyer appears. She's like a proper hissing Doctor Who baddie. She's all using her own carcinogenic slime to kind of keep herself up. She's like a proper nasty Spider-Man. King Mob, badass as ever. He's got this M16 that he's got from one of the guards. Bang, 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 bang. And she kind of runs off for a bit, spits some acid at them because she is basically like an alien from Alien, right? Oh God! Over the page, we've got an advert for the Invisibles, because they're bringing out the first 6 issues as a trade paperback about this time, and so you remember all of this kind of iconography from the first 4 issues or so. And say you want a revolution, collecting the first 8 mind-bending issues of the acclaimed series. Interesting that this is a bit of a throwback to when Yoel was drawing this book and really felt it, as opposed to now when he's drawing it and clearly isn't feeling it that much. And yeah, and it's nice to see this because the design's cool. And kind of makes you want to know more, and yeah, but kind of feels like quite a different book to the one that we're in now, so that's quite interesting. Then on page 18, do you remember her? So this is the lady who brings tea and biscuits. She's like the tea lady who works in scary government offices where they torture anarchists, and remember, she sort of offers King Mob a cup of tea, and basically what happens on this page is that this kind of innocent tea lady runs into the King of all Tears and Miss Dwyer, and they kind of lay like hyperdimensional bugs inside her. It's a bit and it's horrible. It's really well constructed. So we've got this microwave, which is a nice little kind of bit of help for our conceptualization of the problem that we're getting with the Archon's reconstructing of reality into a shape into a type to suit it, because basically, we're inside a microwave oven now, right? And we're being bombarded with Archon waves to make us hot on the inside. And you've also got this other thing where, like, so she's got there's these flowers on the table and a teapot, and you kind of, it's not terribly clear because we've got all of these captions kind of packing in, but you can see the flowers die and the teapot kind of go old and break because the Archon's coming near, right? And it tells this story. Okay, so the captions are saying, and it's not quite, and in a very Beckettian way. It's not sure who the who speaking these captions is, and hasn't been all along, but it is a different voice. It's perhaps not a different entity, but it's a bit of a different voice to the one that was doing all of the carcinogenic 4-dimensional hyperspaceways chat that Miss Dwyer had going on, right? The story is told of a woman who finds herself in a glorious garden orchard of unsurpassed beauty and luxury. Each perfect day is spent indulging in pleasure. Godlike, she wants for nothing. And then on one more glorious evening, she ventures to the crystal lake of sweet ambrosia which nourishes her, and as she dips to drink, her eyes are opened to the hideous truth behind the illusion of existence. And she realizes that she is a monstrous parasitical insect. The heavenly garden is simply the skin of her unsuspecting host, the lake of heaven no more than the bloodstream upon which she battens and feeds. That's how it feels. That's how it feels now. That's how it feels when you come face to face with the Archon, basically. And I think, and it's weird. I'm not quite sure how parasitic this tea lady is. Really, like, is a human entity, like, by necessity parasitic upon existence? I don't know. Maybe it's not a very nice thought, but maybe. And and she seems kind of innocent, but remember she did like look at the guy that they were torturing and offer him a cup of tea, and so perhaps she is under mind control, and therefore is under is unaware of a hideous truth behind her illusion of existence. But I don't know. It does feel a little bit harsh on this nice lady that she has had this recognition of herself as a terrible insect. Feels like she maybe isn't that bad a person. And then it does get confusing because we find out that she's got, and it does like a best man fall. Remember Bobby Murray and how we kind of thought that he was just like a foot soldier getting gunned down and it was cool. And then we learned about his, he had an authentic self too, and we learned all about that. We get that happening very quickly here, where we find out that Mary, as she's being killed by this Archon, has a husband and daughters whose names and faces she suddenly can't remember. But the only thing she can remember is when she was molested as a child and stuff. And all she could feel is shame, disgust, humiliation. The king is talking to her, touching her that way, and she feels like a maggot. She feels like a fly. There's buzzing inside, buzzing everywhere. She's buzzing. She's buzzing is something that you say when you're a rave, right? Uh, the royal eggs hatch inside it before she hatches with the newborn and begins to tear hungrily at the glowing essence of all she was. Bad luck, Mary. Yeah, it's weird because basically it's like they need like a thing here. They need another. I'll get to it, but it's quite dramatic and horrible. Just this kind of sudden, and it's fair enough, right? Like, what have the Archons and Miss Dwyer done so far, which have been that bad? Like, we know they're the baddies because they're the baddies, but they haven't actually done anything yet. What they have done is they've taken an entirely nice, innocent tea lady, and done something abominable to her. So at least we know that they're baddies now, right? But like, I don't know, this bit, it's well written and well done and kind of horrible in a way which it should be. It should be horrible, but it's a bit like you just sort of need like it's only in there because the mechanics of the story sort of just needed another thing in it. I mean, we haven't quite got to what that other thing is yet, but all of this stuff about her realizing the truth of existence just when it's too late and her having been monstrous all along, I think it's a bit harsh and feels a little bit crowbarred into the issue. Anyway, um, okay, back to Jim and Robin. Uh, there are these kind of like like these skulls on sticks, firing sort of laser beams out their eyes. They're kind of like laser tripwires. What are they called? Laser tripwires? Laser. What are they called? You know the things I mean, like infrared trip things. Like these were very new in the mid 90s. That bank vaults or whatever would have invisible tripwires that you could break without even noticing it, and they're a bit like laser sightings on a gun. It was incredibly revelatory at the time. We did not know this that lasers were around, and so we've got this kind of like laser trap network coming out of all of these skulls. It's all very up to the minute. Trust me. Jim makes a joke about having a skeleton key which is a skeleton that's a key. And remember, we've got this House of Fun lock motif. Yeah, keys are a bit of a thing here, and will be for the next issue or two. Um, and he's going to use his skeleton key to unlock the booby traps that these laser things would be. It's just they're walking through the baddie, like the supervillain HQ, and there are booby traps, and they've got to kind of dodge them. And so this is how they're doing it. They're also aware that stuff is going manky in here because of the Archon's influence. Like they are in danger of getting cancer too, right? So all of the champagne and the rum has got dirty grubs swimming about it. Little smells, and the cake that they bought, which was obviously meant to be like an offering to Papa Gay Day, but also just like a way of Jim Crow maintaining his metabolism while it's being sort of supercharged by a god, right? Um, yes. So basically, Jim says Yeah, so Jim says little sickness spirits can't touch Papa Gay Day, so he's not going to get cancer. And then Robin says something which we do need to sort of like notice. She says, I didn't think I'd ever need to use this thing here, but I can generate a shield to disorganize any nanomachines that come near me. That ought to keep me safe. And she just goes, and she basically, you can see her playing with her bracelet, and she goes, beep, beep, beep. And suddenly all of the nanomachines, which are giving everybody cancer, aren't going to affect her. And it's a bit like, what's that? Is that on your phone? What's that app? What have you got? So that's a bit of a question. We'll come back to that. But the way that it just kind of is slipped in here at this point of the issue is quite good. Then suddenly the dead guards that Fanny and Mob have killed and stripped and nicked the clothes of, remember, they've come back to life full of these nasty kind of insect rider things, and they're going to attack them. And this is kind of more like baddie supervillain funhouse stuff that Robin and Jim have got to deal with. And she says, Jim, you any good with zombies? As they get attacked by zombies. We know that Jim is good with zombies, so I think this is going to be fine. Books of Magic, we don't cover that. So yeah, basically we're getting towards the end of the issue now, so things start to happen. So Sir Miles is going, you're going to get killed by Miss Dwyer, you idiot. And he's like, I'm an assassin. I can kill anything. I'll be fine. But then he passes out because he has lost a lot of blood. He is seriously injured, leaving Fanny to face off against Miss Dwyer by herself. Boy, and this is on page 23, Boy and Mr. Six are walking around the funhouse too. Boy is kind of like calling for Jack, but he's lost. And then this is the bit, right, that I was just talking about. Mr. Six says, there's this round thing here that they kind of stumbled across. And Mr. Six goes, my God, this is an abscess. The reality mesh can't take the stresses they're putting on it. It's ready to split. So all of this malarkey that it's not quite clear. So it could just be like all of this malarkey that the nanomachines in the Archon's presence, all of this pressure that they're putting on reality is making reality form an abscess. But once you kind of look at it, and it's not, and this is where the kind of the problem of the rushed art does cause a bit of a problem. Basically, this is Mary. You can tell from the grey hair, but this abscess in reality is what the Archon does to Mary here, back on page 19. We're standing at ground zero. If this thing bursts, we'll have no defense. It'll be the end of the universe in miniature. Call it a tactical Armageddon. Don't really know what that means. But yeah, but like Archon has kind of turned Mary using all of her childhood trauma, and the kind of the shock of having lost her illusions, and all of his magic, obviously, and his nanobadness. He's turning her into like a pocket universe or something, which is full of all of these bad things. And they're a bit like, we're not quite sure what's going to happen while we're stalking around being scary with these invisibles around. And this is like a kind of a fail-safe abscess bomb in reality that they've created. You know, within these issues of the Invisibles, it's not like there's necessarily the secret of the universe being given away at any moment, but it is good fun. It is good, like sci-fi superhero stuff. Jack is kind of like lost down this kind of like psychedelic time tunnel. He's getting a bit freaked out. He can hear Boy, but he doesn't know where she is. He's a bit like, yeah, I can hear you, but where are you? And then he can hear the buzzing that everyone else has been hearing. And then suddenly, boom, final page, Jack is face to face with the Archon. And remember, he's a lost one. He's a lost one. They're about to face off. And that's the end of the issue. And I've still managed to talk for quite a long time. On the Invisible Ink column, basically Grant Morrison is having health problems. We'll talk about that next issue because I think Grant Morrison talks about them himself in the letters page, if memory serves. I'm sure he does. But he's too ill to do the letters page response this issue, so Mark Miller is sitting in for him. Now, I'm grateful because I'm trying to do this episode quickly, Issuesode. Trying to do it quickly because I just want to crack on with my afternoon, really. And I'm not reading Mark Miller. That's not what the podcast is about. I'm not going to pay attention to this letters page if Mark Miller's involved in it. Mark Miller, about 10 years ago in the London riots of 2011, I don't know if you remember them or are aware of what they were about, but basically the cops murdered a guy called, like a black man in North London called Mark Duggan. Then they lied to the press about the fact that he had a gun on them and stuff. Eventually, obviously, it was found out that the cops did it all right, but there were riots that went off in response to it. The riots were pretty minor, really. Nobody likes if there's a riot happening outside in the street, that's pretty scary, obviously. But not as scary as being the kind of person who's who feels like a riot is their only recourse to social expression. That's scary every day. There were riots, and some trainer shops got rolled basically and looted, and some cop cars got burned, and some bins got smashed and stuff. It was not that big a deal riot-wise. It meant a lot to the people involved, and did mark like a period of civil unrest in the last decade. It was the first. I think it was the first time. Was it pre-Occupy? When was Occupy? Time's broken. I don't remember anything. Time's broken. But basically, during all of these riots, Mark Miller tweeted that basically, I can't remember what the exact wording was, and it's probably been deleted or whatever. I don't know. I don't know. He basically said, call in the army, get them to shoot the first wave of rioters, and it'll all be over by tea time. So basically, if you're wondering what side of the Invisibles, and I know that all the sides are the same, but if you're wondering what side all of the Invisibles are, Mark Miller's the kind of man who thinks that you should shoot people for looting trainer shops. So that's the answer to what side he's on. And I'm not going to read Letter Page 10 minutes. I'm going to let someone come back. On the ledge is Dean Motter from Terminal City, who was the advert, as I said, at the start of the issue. He basically sort of explains, what if those beautiful futures, I'm sure he's a decent bloke, I don't mean to take the piss, but it does feel like a boring comic. What if the future was real? Then so what we've got coming out is there's Flex Mentalo issue 2 comes out this month. This is the list of other Vertigo comics that comes out in the month. There's an Invisibles trade paperback. Rediscover Vertigo's time-winding secret society of occult subversives with this 224-page volume collecting issues 1 to 8 of the outrageous ongoing series. Written and created by Grant Morrison with that by Steve Yeowell and Jill Thompson. If you've read those issues, read those issues. If you haven't read those issues, read those issues. Preacher, The Invisibles, obviously. Flex Mentalo. Yeah, there's stuff coming out. There's comics. Go and get some comics. And then finally, there's an advert for Yonder Bont's Twister, which it's from the producers of Jurassic Park and the director of Speed, Twister, The Dark Side of Nature. Now, I've only seen this like once or whatever. I really like Bill Paxton, so Twister is obviously a decent movie. I'm going to say that this relates to the next issue insofar as there's a vortex, right? There's a circular motive or motioning mechanism, and I think that's going to be relevant to the next issue. And it's kind of relevant in terms of like how it's like something destructive and sort of aberrant in nature. It's not aberrant in nature; it's part of nature, but something which is kind of like vortical and scary. It's a bit like an Archon. Yeah, remember how the cloud above St. Paul's is a bit like the monster that was sitting atop St. Paul's in Jack's Pigeon Vision. This cloud is a bit like a monstrous thing too, right? They defeat it with science at the end. They defeat it with science. They defeat twisters. They defeat a natural phenomenon. Opens May 17th everywhere. That's it. That wasn't too long after all, was it? That's good. Okay, thanks for watching. Next issue is next issue. Issue 23. Ooh. And yeah, follow on Diane, patreon.com/Diane podcast, I think is it. Call me an idiot on @BobsyMindless on Twitter. What else? Oh yeah, go to at Rituals Zine, or one word, Rituals Zine, on Twitter, and buy Volume 2, Issue 1 of Rituals and Declarations, because I've got a piece in it. That's it. Great. Thanks for watching. Bye. Bye.